Okinawa, April 23rd, 1945, 23:47 hours. Staff Sergeant Garrett Thatcher pressed his cheek against the walnut stock of his Springfield M1903A4. 28 years old, born in Pocatello, Idaho, a machinist from Oakland who could measure tolerances to 1/10,000th of an inch, a farm boy who learned to shoot coyotes at 300 yards before he turned 12. But this rifle wasn't the one he'd trained with. The scope, mounted above the action, weighed an additional 2.8 pounds, far heavier than any optic he'd ever used. A bulky cylinder jutted from the receiver. Cables snaked down to Corporal William Prescott, crouched 3 feet behind him in the darkness. Prescott carried a 24-pound battery pack on his back. The TM-11 power unit hummed softly, feeding 1,500 volts to the scope's photocathode. They had exactly 4.3 hours of battery life remaining. In the pitch darkness of the Kakazu Ridge approach, Thatcher couldn't see his own hands 6 inches from his face. Neither could the 437 Japanese soldiers dug into the hillside ahead. But Thatcher could see them. Through the bulky infrared scope, the world glowed with phosphorescent light. Heat patterns bloomed like ghosts in his vision. A Japanese machine gunner, 183 yards northeast, shifted position in his spider hole. Thatcher watched the man's body heat paint a clear silhouette against the cool earth. The temperature difference was only 8 degrees Fahrenheit, but the M2 sniper scope's cascaded image converter tube amplified it into stark contrast. The machine gunner stood. Thatcher exhaled slowly, squeezed. The Springfield cracked through the night. Muzzle flash bloomed white-orange in his peripheral vision. Through the M2's eyepiece, he watched the heat pattern jerk backward, then crumple. The body's warmth began dissipating immediately into the cooler earth. 2:51 hours. First confirmed kill with the M2 sniper scope in combat. Prescott whispered the time into his log. Date, range, atmospheric conditions. Every detail mattered. This wasn't just killing, this was data collection. The technology was too new, too experimental. Every shot, every observation, every system malfunction. The scientists back in New Jersey needed to know. Thatcher scanned right, sweeping the scope across Kakazu Ridge's western approach. 2 more infrared silhouettes, 220 yards out, positioned in a shell crater, not moving, probably sleeping. He let them sleep. Dead men couldn't report the impossible. An American sniper shooting accurately in pitch darkness. The Pacific night had belonged to Japan for 3 years. For 1,347 nights, Japanese soldiers moved through darkness with practiced efficiency. They memorized terrain during daylight, then executed complex coordinated attacks without flashlights, without flares, without any illumination that might compromise their positions. The statistics were written in American blood. Between December 1941 and January 1945, United States forces recorded 14,477 casualties from nighttime infiltration attacks across the Pacific Theater. On Guadalcanal in October 1942, Japanese forces conducted 17 separate night assaults against Marine positions. American defenders, unable to see attackers until they were within grenade range, suffered massive losses during those nocturnal engagements. Standard doctrine required defensive lines to fire blindly into darkness at suspected enemy positions, expending thousands of rounds with estimated hit rates below 2%. 2%. 98 bullets fired into empty night for every 2 that found flesh. The problem compounded with each island. At Tarawa, in November 1943, Japanese infiltrators killed over 100 Marines during 3 nights of fighting. Many died in hand-to-hand combat inside American foxholes. Defenders reported hearing movement, hearing breathing, hearing whispered Japanese commands, but seeing nothing until enemy soldiers were literally on top of them. Flares helped, but each illumination round revealed American positions as clearly as Japanese ones. The moment a star shell burst overhead, both sides became visible. Both sides became targets. Japanese mortar teams waited for the magnesium glow. then dropped rounds on the positions the light exposed. At Saipan, in June 1944, Japanese snipers positioned themselves within 80 to 120 yards of American lines, close enough that muzzle flash revealed their location for only the briefest instant before they displaced to new positions. These night hunters killed hundreds of Americans on Saipan alone. Operating with near impunity in the darkness, by 1944, the United States military recognized night combat as a critical vulnerability. Traditional solutions failed completely. Searchlights, star shells, magnesium flares, all suffered the same fundamental flaw. They illuminated both attacker and defender. The side that lit up the battlefield painted itself as a target. Intelligence reports from Saipan documented Japanese officers specifically training units to exploit American night blindness. After dark, enemy forces owned the tactical initiative. They chose when to attack, where to attack, how to attack. American forces could only react, could only defend, could only fire blindly into darkness and hope. Hope wasn't a strategy. The solution began in laboratories far from the Pacific. The National Defense Research Committee, working with RCA, working with Western Electric. They'd been developing image intensification technology since 1942. Early prototypes were disasters, 60 pounds of equipment, requiring vehicle-mounted power supplies, producing images so dim they were barely usable. The first generation couldn't see past 50 yards, couldn't maintain focus through rifle recoil, couldn't survive tropical humidity. Other nations had attempted night vision development. Germany experimented with active infrared systems. Britain conducted laboratory research. But by late 1944, America's approach represented the most promising path forward. What American forces needed was something different, a passive system, something that didn't announce the shooter's position, something that worked beyond 50 yards, something a trained sniper could actually use. By late 1944, the technology had matured. The M2 sniper scope wasn't a single piece of equipment. It was a system, and every component mattered. The scope itself, officially designated T120, measured 14.7 inches long, weighed 2.8 pounds when mounted. It contained a cascaded image intensifier tube capable of amplifying available light by a factor of 75,000 times. The scope amplified available light through a cascaded tube system. Photons became electrons. Electrons multiplied through 3 stages. Final output, visible light 75,000 times brighter than the original image, enough to turn absolute darkness into a jade-tinted landscape visible to the shooter. The technical explanation made it sound simple. The reality was anything but. The scope required 1,500 volts of electrical potential to operate, enough to deliver a lethal shock if the seals failed. Power came from the TM11 battery pack, a 24-pound unit carried by the spotter. The battery pack contained wet-cell lead-acid batteries and a vibrator transformer to step up voltage. A 10-foot armored cable connected battery to scope. Sniper and spotter had to maintain that exact distance during operations. Move too far apart, the cable went taut. Move too close, it created slack that could snag on vegetation, on rocks, on anything. The complete system totaled 37.6 pounds. For comparison, a standard M1903A4 with conventional scope weighed 9.2 pounds. Snipers carrying the M2 system hauled 4 times the weight, plus their normal combat load of ammunition, grenades, water, rations. But when it worked, when atmospheric conditions aligned and batteries held charge and the shooter maintained proper technique, the M2 sniper scope granted a capability the enemy couldn't counter. It let American snipers hunt in darkness. The Japanese considered their exclusive domain. Garrett Thatcher had been born for this, not for war. Nobody's born for war, but for precision, for patience, for the kind of mechanical thinking that turns obstacles into solutions. Pocatello, Idaho. Population 4,200. a town where the Snake River cut through high desert, where winters dropped to 20 below zero, where if you didn't work the railroad or farm potatoes, you left. Thatcher's father ran a small farm, 80 acres of potatoes and hay. The coyotes came down from the mountains each winter, killed chickens, killed young calves if they could, cost money the family didn't have. At age 8, Thatcher's father handed him a Winchester Model 1894, 30-30 caliber, said 3 words, "Make them scared." Thatcher learned to shoot the way some boys learn piano, through repetition, through discipline, through understanding that every shot mattered because ammunition cost money. By age 12, he could hit a running jackrabbit at 300 yards with the .22, not because he was naturally gifted, because he'd fired 10,000 practice rounds, because he'd learned to calculate windage by watching grass bend, to estimate range by comparing the target's size to his thumb, to squeeze the trigger between heartbeats so the pulse wouldn't disturb his aim. His family ate based on whether he hit squirrels, no margin for error. At 18, Thatcher left for Oakland, got hired at Norfolk Naval Shipyard, operating lathes, cutting metal to tolerances of 0.0001 inches. Measure twice, cut once. A mistake on a lathe destroyed the part and cost the Navy money. The same spatial precision that made him a good machinist would make him deadly with a rifle. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Thatcher heard the news on the radio at the boarding house. Japanese bombs falling on American sailors, men drowning in burning oil, the Arizona sinking with 1,100 men trapped inside. He enlisted the next morning. 3 days after Pearl Harbor. Driven by something quieter than rage, more like duty, somebody had to stop this. Might as well be him. The Army tested his vision during induction. 2010 in both eyes. Better than normal. Could see clearly at 20 feet what most men needed to be at 10 feet to see. The rifle range instructor noticed him shooting. Perfect groups, no wasted movement. Sniper training followed. Thatcher deflected the praise, didn't talk much, just did the job, shot the targets, passed the tests, learned to estimate range, to account for bullet drop, to remain motionless for hours, to slow his breathing, to make one shot count. "Just doing what needs doing," he'd say when instructors complimented his scores. That was Thatcher. Quiet competence over loud heroism. William Prescott came from different stock. Born 1921, Boston, Massachusetts. His father was an electrical contractor, ran wire through new buildings going up in the 20s. Prescott grew up around circuits, around voltage, around the mathematics of electricity. Smart kid. Got into MIT, studied electrical engineering for 2 years, learning about photocathodes, about electron cascades, about how to amplify weak signals into strong ones. Then Pearl Harbor happened. Prescott could have stayed in school. Engineering students got deferments, essential to the war effort from laboratories and factories. But that felt like hiding. His older brother was already in North Africa with the 1st Infantry Division. Prescott enlisted in 1943, 22 years old. The Army looked at his MIT transcript and assigned him to signals, but Prescott requested infantry, wanted to fight, not sit behind radio equipment. They compromised, made him a sniper's spotter, someone who understood electronics, because something new was coming, something that needed men who understood voltage and current and power systems. The M2 program. Thatcher and Prescott met at Camp Pendleton in February 1945. Got paired because the system required both skill sets. Thatcher could shoot, Prescott could keep the electronics running. Cable management, tactical employment. They practiced in complete darkness, learning to trust the phosphorescent glow instead of their natural night vision. Many struggled initially. The human eye adapts to darkness over 30 to 45 minutes, developing reasonable sensitivity, enough to see shapes, movement, enough to function. The M2 defeated that adaptation, forced shooters to abandon evolved biology for electronic imaging. Instructors emphasized limitations. The scope couldn't see through fog, smoke, or heavy rain. Extreme temperature contrasts created thermal blooming that temporarily whited out the image. Glass blocked the infrared spectrum the scope detected, and the phosphor's glow, while faint, could be visible to nearby troops if they looked directly at the shooter's face from the side. But when it worked, when atmospheric conditions aligned and batteries held charge and the shooter maintained proper technique, the M2 sniper scope let you see what shouldn't be visible. March 20th, Thatcher and Prescott got the briefing. Captain Reynolds stood in front of the 30 teams, looking tired, looking like a man who'd seen too many experimental programs fail. "Gentlemen," he said, "you're testing equipment that's never been used in combat. The scientists give it a 40% estimated failure rate in tropical conditions. The battery specs are theoretical. We don't know how humidity affects performance. We don't know if the seals will hold. We don't know if the image quality will be sufficient for accurate shooting." He paused. "But if it works, if even half of you get systems that function, you'll change this war. Japan owns the night, has since Pearl Harbor. That ends with you." No inspiring speech, no false promises, just facts. Thatcher appreciated that. April 20th, they shipped to Okinawa, landed April 21st, got assigned to defensive positions around Kakazu Ridge. Intelligence reported 437 Japanese soldiers entrenched in the approaches, dug into caves, into spider holes, into positions they'd spent weeks fortifying. The Marines would assault at dawn. But first the night had to pass, and for the first time in 3 years of Pacific War, American snipers would hunt in that darkness. Thatcher settled into his position. Prescott checked the TM-11 battery pack one final time. Voltage reading showed full charge, 1500 volts ready, 4.3 hours of operational time if the tropical humidity didn't degrade performance faster than predicted. The sun dropped below the horizon at 19:23 hours. By 2200 hours, darkness was absolute. Thatcher powered up the M2 scope. The emerald glow appeared in the eyepiece. The world transformed. Cool earth appeared dark. Warm bodies appeared bright. The thermal contrast painted enemy soldiers as clear as daylight targets. Thatcher's heart rate slowed. His breathing steadied. Prescott whispered, "Battery holding. Voltage stable. You're good." 23:47 hours. The Japanese machine gunner stood. Garrett Thatcher, 28 years old, from Pocatello, Idaho, son of a potato farmer, became the first American to kill an enemy soldier using electronic night vision in combat. The first, but not the last. The heat pattern dropped, disappeared into the cool earth. Thatcher scanned left, methodical, patient. The jade-tinted world revealed what darkness hid. Movement 264 yards out. A soldier emerging from a cave entrance Thatcher hadn't spotted during daylight reconnaissance. The cave's interior retained warmth. The night air had dropped to 61 degrees. The soldier's body temperature created a 37-degree differential against the background. Through conventional optics, in this darkness, Thatcher would have seen nothing. Through the M2, the target glowed like a lantern. Range 264. Elevation approximately 40 feet above Thatcher's position. Wind had picked up slightly, maybe 2 miles per hour from the east. At this distance, with the 150 grain M2 ball, that meant maybe half an inch of drift. Negligible. The Japanese soldier moved along a trench line, clearly visible in the scope's phosphorescent display. Thatcher tracked him, watching patterns. The man paused every 15 steps, listening, smart, disciplined. Probably an NCO checking positions. Thatcher waited until the soldier stopped at a position where the background terrain provided clear contrast. Squeezed. The Springfield barked. The infrared silhouette dropped. Prescott logged it. 02:51 hours. 264 yards. Single shot. Confirmed hit. By 04:30 hours, Thatcher had fired 7 rounds. 7 Japanese soldiers who thought darkness protected them had died without ever knowing an American could see them. Then, at 04:47, the M2's image began flickering. Prescott checked the TM-11 battery pack. The voltage indicator showed 880 volts, below the 950-volt minimum for stable operation. They'd been running the scope continuously for over 2 hours. The humid tropical air had degraded battery performance faster than specifications predicted. Thatcher powered down the scope. His natural night vision was worthless. He'd been staring at the phosphor screen's glow for 2 hours, destroying his eyes' dark adaptation. The rods and cones in his retina needed 30 minutes to recover full sensitivity. He couldn't see anything. For 15 minutes, they sat blind, while Thatcher's vision slowly recovered and Prescott swapped in a fresh battery pack. 15 minutes, when Japanese infantry could have been moving, could have been flanking, could have been preparing an assault. 15 minutes of vulnerability, the cost of electronic warfare. When the scope powered back up at 0503 hours, the tactical situation had changed. Japanese infantry were repositioning in the pre-dawn darkness. Moving before daylight would expose them. Thatcher counted 11 distinct body heat outlines, shifting through terrain 150 to 300 yards out. He began working methodically. Target, range, fire, log, scan for next target. The Springfield's bolt moved smoothly. Thousands of repetitions had made the motion automatic. Extract spent casing. Thumb a fresh round from the stripper clip. Chamber it. Close the bolt. Acquire target. Fire. At 0527 hours, first light began washing out the M2's image. Temperature contrast decreased as ambient warmth rose. By 0544 hours, the scope was essentially useless. Too much natural light for the image intensifier to handle effectively. Thatcher had fired 23 rounds total. Prescott's log showed 21 confirmed hits. 2 possibles where the target had dropped into cover before they could confirm. 0 misses that they could identify. The mission had been billed as a technology test. Thatcher and Prescott were supposed to observe, document, report. But 21 dead Japanese soldiers represented more than a field trial. It represented a capability the enemy couldn't counter, didn't understand, had no defense against. 3 nights later, April 26, 1945, 4 additional M2-equipped teams operated across Okinawa's southern sector. Thatcher and Prescott, Sergeant Patrick Brennan and Corporal Thomas Hartley, Corporal Raymond Donovan and Private First Class Malcolm Fletcher, Staff Sergeant Edwin Caldwell and Corporal Douglas Whitmore. 4 teams, 8 men, 4 M2 systems. Combined, they logged 67 confirmed kills during darkness hours. 67. The Marines captured 3 Japanese prisoners the following morning. Standard interrogation, name, rank, unit. Then the questions about defenses, about troop strength, about supply lines. One prisoner, a private named Takeshi, kept mentioning something else. Yurei Sogekihei. The interpreter translated. Ghost snipers. The interrogator pressed for details. Takeshi's hands shook as he spoke. His platoon had lost 9 men in one night. 9. Shot in darkness so complete they couldn't see their own hands. No muzzle flash. No sound until the bullet arrived. Just men falling, dying, from an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't fight. We thought it was spirits, Takeshi said through the interpreter. Vengeance from the dead. Some of the men refused to leave their positions after dark, said the ghosts would take them. The psychological impact rippled through Japanese lines faster than any tactical advantage. Officers began issuing new orders. Suspend night movements in sectors where American positions were established. Maintain defensive postures after dark. No patrols, no infiltrations, no attacks. The night. Japan's domain since December 7, 1941. Suddenly contested territory. American signals intelligence intercepted Japanese radio traffic throughout May. The confusion was evident in every transmission. One battalion commander reported to his regimental headquarters. Enemy demonstrates exceptional sniper capability at extended ranges during darkness. Estimate 3 to 4 American sniper teams operating with superior night equipment. Request counter-sniper assets. They thought Thatcher's rapid position changes meant multiple shooters. That one man moving every 20 minutes after firing was actually 4 men working simultaneously. A Japanese intelligence officer at Shuri submitted a formal report. The Americans captured it 3 weeks later when Shuri fell. The report theorized about American capabilities: radar-guided artillery that could target individual soldiers, silent rifles using new propellants that produced no muzzle flash, poison gas projectiles designed to kill without explosion. One section speculated about invisible bullets, another about American soldiers with supernatural vision. A third suggested the Americans had developed night vision goggles, similar to what German research had attempted. But none came close to the truth. None imagined a cascaded image intensifier tube amplifying available light by 75,000 times. None conceived of a 1,500-volt power system small enough for one man to carry. None understood the Americans had turned thermal radiation into visible light. The technology gap wasn't just an advantage, it was a chasm Japanese military science couldn't bridge. On June 18, 1945, a Japanese patrol discovered something in dense vegetation near their defensive line. A discarded TM-11 battery pack. Dead batteries. Depleted after 5 hours of continuous operation, Thatcher and Prescott had left it behind during a hasty withdrawal 2 days earlier. Standard procedure. The batteries were heavy. Replacements were available. No reason to carry dead weight. The patrol brought it to their engineering officer. He examined it carefully, opened the casing, studied the lead-acid cells, measured the voltage specifications. 1,500 volts. Unusual. Very unusual. The weight. 24 pounds. Just for batteries. The connector ports, clearly designed to power something. But what? He filed a report. Recovered American power source. Purpose unknown. Specifications indicate high voltage application. Does not match any known American radio equipment. Does not match any known optical equipment. Hypothesis. Americans developing new electronic weapon system. Nature of system cannot be determined from power source alone. The battery pack sat in a Japanese supply depot for 6 weeks. Nobody ever connected it to the ghost snipers, killing their men in darkness. The technology remained a complete mystery. May 31st, 1945. Near Shuri Castle. Sergeant Patrick Brennan and Corporal Thomas Hartley operated their M2 system from a bombed-out building's second floor. Good position. Overlooked Japanese defensive lines. 340 yards of clear fields of fire. Brennan was 31, from Philadelphia. Worked as a steelworker before the war. Strong, patient, good with a rifle. He'd scored 89 confirmed kills across 3 months of M2 operations. Hartley was 23, from Knoxville, Tennessee. Studied engineering at University of Tennessee for 1 year before enlisting. Understood the M2's electronics better than most. Could diagnose voltage problems by listening to the TM-11's hum. They'd been operating together since April 20th. Developed the kind of wordless communication good teams build. Brennan would spot a target. Hartley would confirm range and battery status with a hand signal. 1 shot, 1 kill, move to next target. Professional, efficient, deadly. At 02:33 hours, everything changed. Japanese infantry launched a surprise assault on their position. Not a probing attack, a full company, over 100 men. Coordinated, fast, aggressive. Grenades came through the lower windows. The building's ground floor erupted in fragmentation and dust. Brennan and Hartley grabbed their equipment, started moving toward the stairs. An explosion. Close, too close. Shrapnel tore through the wooden floor. Brennan took fragments to his left leg, fell. The pain was immediate and total. Hot metal buried in muscle. He tried to stand. The leg wouldn't support weight. Hartley dropped the TM-11 battery pack, grabbed Brennan under the arms, started dragging. 40 yards to friendly lines, 40 yards through incoming fire. Japanese soldiers were already entering the building behind them. They made it, crossed into Marine positions. Corpsmen rushed forward, started treating Brennan's leg. Then Hartley realized. The M2 scope, the TM-11 battery pack, still in the building. Serial numbers T120-23 and TM11-18. Classified equipment, secret technology. Standing orders were absolute and unambiguous. If capture was imminent, destroy the equipment. Better to sacrifice the hardware than let it fall into enemy hands. Hartley looked at Brennan. Brennan's face was grey with shock, blood soaking through the tourniquet the corpsman had applied. "Leave it," Brennan said through gritted teeth. "Not worth dying for." Hartley didn't answer. He grabbed 2 thermite grenades from a weapons cache, ran back toward the building, alone. Japanese soldiers were inside now. Hartley could hear them moving through the ground floor, searching, calling to each other. He reached the second floor, found the M2 scope and TM11 battery pack where they'd fallen, pulled both thermite grenades, set them next to the equipment, triggered the fuses. 4 seconds. Hartley ran. Behind him, the thermite grenades ignited, 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, temperature high enough to melt steel, high enough to turn image intensifier tubes into slag, high enough to fuse the TM11's lead-acid batteries into unrecognizable lumps of metal. The building's second floor caught fire, wooden beams igniting from the intense heat. Hartley made it back to American lines. Brennan was already being carried to an aid station. The M2 system, serial T120-23. Gone. Destroyed. Technology secure. Japanese soldiers searched the burned building the next morning, found melted metal, shattered glass, unidentifiable components fused together by heat. They salvaged nothing useful, learned nothing actionable. Thomas Hartley received the Bronze Star. The citation remained classified for 13 years. When it was finally declassified in 1958, it read simply, "For heroic action in recovering and destroying sensitive equipment under enemy fire." No mention of night vision, no mention of M2, no mention of what that sensitive equipment actually did. Patrick Brennan survived. The shrapnel damaged nerves in his left leg permanently. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. Died in 1983, age 69. Hartley never spoke publicly about the incident until a military history researcher interviewed him in 1992. By then, he was 70 years old. The Bronze Star citation had been declassified. The M2 program was public knowledge. The researcher asked why he'd run back. Hartley thought for a long moment. "The M2 gave us an advantage the enemy couldn't match," he said. "Couldn't understand. If they'd captured one working, studied it, maybe they figure something out, maybe they develop countermeasures. Maybe American boys die because I was too scared to do my job." He shook his head. Wasn't heroic, was just doing what needed doing. By May 15, 1945, the Marine Corps had received 84 M2 sniper scope systems. The Army took delivery of 43 additional units. Distribution prioritized divisions engaged in active combat operations, primarily Okinawa, but also units preparing for something bigger, Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of mainland Japan. The 10th Army analyzed combat data from April and May. The numbers told a clear story. Sectors with M2 coverage showed remarkable changes. Successful Japanese night infiltration attacks down 43%. Nighttime American casualties down 34%. Enemy morale declining. Troops refusing night missions. Officers reporting difficulty maintaining discipline after dark. The invisible enemy, the ghost snipers. Creating fear beyond the actual number of M2 systems deployed. 67 kills on April 26th. 89 kills on May 3rd, 112 kills on May 9th. The numbers accumulated. The psychological impact multiplied. Japanese soldiers who'd owned the night since Pearl Harbor now huddled in their positions after dark, afraid to move, afraid to fight, afraid of an enemy they couldn't see. The tactical initiative, held by Japan for 3 years, slowly shifting to America, not through superior numbers, not through better training, through technology, through innovation, through men like Garrett Thatcher and William Prescott, turning electronic components into tactical advantage. The darkness no longer belonged exclusively to Japan, and the war was about to change in ways nobody yet understood. July 1945. The War Department planning rooms in Washington buzzed with activity. Maps of Japan covered every wall. Kyushu, Honshu, beaches marked for landing zones, cities marked for objectives, everything marked with estimated casualties. Operation Downfall, The invasion of mainland Japan. Planners allocated resources, infantry divisions, artillery battalions, naval support, air cover, and something new, something most of the planning staff had never heard of: 300 M2 sniper scope systems for the initial assault waves. 300. Production ramping to 50 complete systems per week by September. Training facilities in Hawaii and California preparing to certify 600 sniper spotter teams by October. The M2 program expanding from experimental technology to standard tactical doctrine. But there was a problem. RCA's Camden, New Jersey facility could only manufacture 8 to 12 complete systems per week. Each image intensifier tube required hand assembly in clean room conditions. A single dust particle inside the tube during manufacturing rendered the entire unit worthless. Contamination, electron scattering, image degradation, failure. Quality control rejected 30% of manufactured tubes during final testing. 30%. For every 10 tubes RCA built, only 7 met specifications. The other 3 went to salvage. Rare materials recovered, cesium reclaimed, antimony recycled, phosphor compounds reprocessed. But the precision glass envelopes, the vacuum seals, the carefully aligned photocathode layers, all destroyed. The TM11 battery packs presented separate challenges. Lead-acid batteries in tropical climates degraded rapidly. Field reports from Okinawa indicated battery life averaging 3.2 hours instead of the specified 5 hours. Heat, humidity, constant vibration from rifle recoil, all contributed to accelerated failure. The War Department's logistics division scrambled, established battery reconditioning facilities at forward bases, shipped chemical supplies for electrode restoration, trained technicians to rebuild depleted cells. But production couldn't keep pace with demand. Then, on August 6, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 70,000 dead in an instant. 3 days later, August 9th, a second atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki. 40,000 dead. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender in a radio broadcast to the Japanese people. The war was over. Operation Downfall cancelled. The 300 M2 systems never built. The 600 trained teams never deployed. The planned invasion never launched. The M2 sniper scope's combat use ended after exactly 4 months of operational deployment. 4 months, from April 23rd to August 15th. 114 days, during which 89 M2 systems saw combat, during which American snipers killed an estimated 2,300 Japanese soldiers in conditions where conventional optics were useless. 2,300 men who died without ever understanding how they'd been seen in absolute darkness. The technology that made it possible was extraordinary. At the heart of the M2 sat the image intensifier tube, 11 inches long, 2.3 inches in diameter, a marvel of precision engineering that most operators never fully understood. The front objective lens, multi-element glass, ground to tolerances measured in microns, focused incoming light onto the photocathode, a thin layer of cesium antimony alloy, special properties. When photons struck the photocathode, it released electrons. The photoelectric effect. Einstein's Nobel Prize discovery turned into a weapon. Those electrons accelerated through a vacuum toward the first phosphor screen. Zinc-cadmium sulfide coating glowed when electrons impacted it. But here was where the cascade became critical. That first phosphor's glow struck a second photocathode layer, generating a new stream of electrons. Those electrons hit a second phosphor screen, generated more light, struck a third photocathode, generated more electrons, hit a third phosphor screen. 3 stages. Each stage multiplied the signal by a factor of approximately 42. 42 times 42 times 42 equals 74,088. light amplification approaching 75,000 times the original intensity. Inside that 11-inch tube, engineers had created a near-perfect vacuum. Any residual gas molecules would scatter electrons, degrade the image, destroy effectiveness. The tube's glass envelope was sealed with indium gaskets that maintained vacuum integrity even when subjected to recoil shock from the Springfield's .30-06 cartridge. 15 rounds fired, 20 rounds, 50 rounds. The vacuum held. Power consumption was brutal. 1,500 volts potential across the photocathode. Drew 0.8 amps continuously. 840 watts of power. The TM11 battery pack's 6 lead-acid cells could sustain that draw for 5 hours in ideal conditions. But Pacific heat and humidity shortened life significantly. Operators learned workarounds, short power pulses for scanning, full power only when target acquisition seemed likely. Some teams carried 2 TM11 packs, accepting the extra 24 pounds of weight for doubled operational time. The scope's biggest limitation wasn't technical, it was atmospheric. Water vapor absorbed infrared wavelengths. High humidity reduced effective range by up to 40%. Heavy fog made the M2 nearly useless. Rain scattered heat patterns into noise. Temperature inversions created bizarre effects where cold air settled in valleys while warm air lingered on ridgelines. Objects appeared inverted, cold signatures appearing warm, warm signatures appearing cold. Compared to the German Zielgerät 1229 Vampire system, the M2 was superior in almost every metric. The Vampire required an active infrared illuminator, essentially an invisible flashlight that enemy forces with their own infrared detection equipment could potentially spot. The M2 was passive, detecting ambient thermal radiation without broadcasting any signature. The Vampire weighed 5.5 pounds for the scope alone, plus a 30-pound battery pack, total 35.5 pounds. The M2's combined weight was 37.6 pounds, heavier. But the American system provided better image quality and longer range. The Soviets had no equivalent technology in 1945, neither did the Japanese. Britain's night vision research remained in laboratory stages. America's M2 sniper scope represented the most advanced operational night vision system in the world. But it remained imperfect. Image resolution was poor, approximately 400 lines compared to 1,000+ lines in conventional optics. The phosphor screen's persistence meant fast-moving targets left ghost trails. The narrow 7-degree field of view created tunnel vision. Still, it worked. And now the war was over. September 4, 1945, production of the M2 sniper scope formally ended. Total manufacturing run: 137 complete systems. 89 had been deployed to combat zones. 14 sat at training facilities. 22 remained in depot storage. 12 were undergoing maintenance or repair. The War Department immediately classified all M2-related documentation as secret. Technical manuals disappeared into restricted archives. Operational reports were stamped with classification levels. Even photographs of the equipment became controlled material. The classification would remain in effect until March 1958. 13 years of silence. Why the secrecy? 2 reasons. First, the image intensifier technology had direct applications to electronic night vision systems the military was already developing for post-war use. Revealing technical details would accelerate foreign development efforts. The Soviets, the British, anyone who might become an adversary in the emerging Cold War. Second, intelligence analysts believed the M2's mere existence remained unknown to Soviet forces. The Japanese had never captured a working system, had never understood what killed their soldiers in darkness. That uncertainty provided strategic advantage. Let the Soviets wonder, let them guess, let them waste resources developing countermeasures to weapons they didn't understand. Between October and December 1945, the 89 M2 systems returned from Pacific deployment underwent systematic destruction. Engineers carefully dismantled each unit, recovering components containing rare materials. The cesium-antimony photocathodes, worth reclaiming. Cesium was expensive, difficult to refine. Every gram recovered meant one less gram to purchase. Phosphor screen compounds. Zinc-cadmium sulfide, also valuable. Reprocessed and reused in other applications. Precision optics, the multi-element objective lenses. Ground glass worth hundreds of dollars per unit, salvaged for future optical instruments. But the image intensifier tubes themselves, the heart of the system, the technology that made night vision possible, crushed and smelted, destroyed completely, ensuring no foreign power could reverse engineer American innovations from captured equipment. The TM11 battery packs were stripped, lead reclaimed from the acid cells, copper recovered from the transformers. Even the steel casings were melted down and recycled. 136 M2 systems reduced to raw materials. One survived. Serial number T120-47, retained by the Army Ordnance Corps for historical purposes. A single example of technology that had changed warfare, preserved for future study, for museums, for remembrance. In 1961, T120-47 was transferred to the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. It remains there today, sometimes in storage, occasionally displayed in exhibitions about military technology development. The only physical survivor of a program that existed for 4 months and killed over 2,000 enemy soldiers. Garrett Thatcher returned to California in October 1945. No victory parade, no public recognition. He took a bus from the port to Oakland, walked to his old boarding house. The landlady still had his room available. He went back to Norfolk Naval Shipyard. They needed machinists. The war was over, but ships still needed maintenance. Lathes still needed operators. Thatcher was good with tolerances. They hired him back at his old pay grade. He met a woman named Dorothy in 1946, a nurse who'd served at a stateside hospital. She understood that combat veterans didn't always want to talk about what they'd seen, what they'd done. They married in 1947, had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, raised them in a small house near the shipyard. Thatcher worked, came home, had dinner with his family, helped with homework, fixed things around the house. Neighbors knew he'd been a soldier, knew he'd served in the Pacific, knew he'd seen combat. Few knew he'd been a sniper. None knew about the M2, about the phosphorescent scope that let him see in absolute darkness, about the 21 Japanese soldiers he'd killed in one night, about the 89 total confirmed kills across 4 months of operations. Classification restrictions prevented discussion, even with family, even with his wife. For 13 years, Garrett Thatcher carried memories he couldn't share. He'd wake sometimes in the night, seeing jade-tinted silhouettes in his mind, watching bodies fall, feeling the Springfields recoil, hearing Prescott's whispered confirmation of kills. Dorothy would find him sitting in the kitchen, 2 in the morning, cup of coffee going cold. "Bad dreams?" she'd ask. "Yeah," he'd say, "bad dreams." That was all. He couldn't tell her more. In March 1958, the Army partially declassified the M2 program, released selected portions of documentation for inclusion in historical records. Thatcher finally told his family, sat them down one evening, Dorothy, the kids, told them about Okinawa, about the scope, about the technology. His daughter Susan was 11 years old. She remembers her father's hands shaking slightly as he spoke, remembers him saying it was the strangest weapon he'd ever used, and the most effective. Remembers him crying. "I killed a lot of men," he said quietly. "They were soldiers, following orders, like me, but I killed them anyway, because it was my job." Dorothy held his hand. The kids didn't fully understand. Not then. How could they? They were children growing up in peacetime California. The war was history. The sacrifices were abstract. But Susan never forgot that moment. 31 years later, she would understand. 1989, 4 years before her father died. Susan drove Garrett Thatcher to Washington. The Smithsonian was hosting a special exhibition, World War II technology. They'd brought T120-47 out of storage for display. Thatcher stood in front of the glass case, staring at the scope he'd used 44 years earlier. The same scope that had shown him heat patterns in absolute darkness. The same scope that had made him a ghost hunter. Susan noticed his hands shaking. "You okay, Dad?" Thatcher reached out, touched the glass. His fingerprints left marks on the pristine surface. "I killed 21 men the first night with this," he said quietly. 89 total. They never saw me. Never knew what killed them. He paused. "I was 28 years old. Thought I was doing something important. Thought it mattered that I was good at killing." "It did matter," Susan said. Thatcher shook his head. "What matters is that nobody has to use this anymore. What matters is that the technology got better, lighter, safer. What matters is that maybe fewer boys have to do what I did." He looked at his daughter. "I was good at killing. That's not something to be proud of. But if being good at it meant the war ended faster, meant fewer Americans died, meant this technology evolved into something that protects soldiers today." He touched the glass again. Then maybe it was worth carrying that weight. Susan held her father's arm as they left the museum. Garrett Thatcher never visited the Smithsonian again. He died in 1991, age 74, heart attack, quick. The doctor said he probably didn't suffer. He never knew that military historians would later recognize the M2 program as a pivotal moment in military technology development. Never knew his detailed after-action reports, declassified in 1995, would provide the most comprehensive operational data on early night vision employment. Never knew he was part of history. He just thought he'd done his job. William Prescott took a different path, returned to MIT in 1946, completed his electrical engineering degree, graduated with honors in 1948. RCA hired him immediately, sent him to their Camden facility, the same facility that had manufactured M2 image intensifier tubes. Prescott didn't know that connection for decades. The M2 program was classified. RCA's work on it was compartmentalized. Engineers who'd built the tubes couldn't discuss it. Prescott, who'd operated them in combat, couldn't discuss it. He worked on television technology, cathode ray tubes, electron guns, phosphor screens. The same basic principles as the M2 applied to entertainment instead of warfare. In 1996, an RCA engineer cleaning out old archives found a box of field reports from Okinawa, declassified but forgotten, buried in storage. One report stood out: detailed battery performance data from April 23rd through 24th, 1945. Voltage readings every 30 minutes, temperature measurements, humidity correlation, load calculations, signed by Corporal William Prescott. The engineer recognized the name. Prescott still worked at RCA, senior engineer now, near retirement. He brought the report to Prescott's office. Prescott read it. His own handwriting from 51 years earlier, his own measurements, his own observations. "Do you know what this is?" the younger engineer asked. "Yes," Prescott said quietly. "These notes, this data, it went into the Gen 2 development program. The battery improvements we made in the 70s, they came from field reports like this." Prescott looked at him. "The systems we're building now, the night vision that went to the Middle East, that's protecting soldiers today. It started here. It started with you." William Prescott realized something in that moment. The technology he'd helped deploy at Okinawa, the jade-tinted images that showed Thatcher where to aim. That technology hadn't died when the war ended. It had evolved. Generation 1 night vision appeared in the 1960s. Lighter systems, improved photocathode materials, better image intensifier designs, deployed extensively in Southeast Asian conflicts. Generation 2 came in the 1970s. Micro-channel plate technology, significant performance improvements, images clearer, ranges longer, battery life extended. Generation 3 emerged in the 1980s, image quality and sensitivity that would have seemed like science fiction to Thatcher and Prescott. Modern night vision weighs ounces instead of pounds, runs for 40-plus hours on standard batteries, provides near-daylight clarity in conditions the M2 would have considered completely dark. But the fundamental concept, the core innovation, the idea that you could amplify available light to create tactical advantage during nighttime operations, that traces directly back to those 137 M2 systems built in 1945. Every night vision device used by American forces today inherits design principles and operational concepts first proven on Okinawa's hills. The image intensifier cascade, the passive detection approach, the integration with precision rifles, all pioneered by the M2 program. Modern special operations forces conducting nighttime raids in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in places still classified. They rely on technology whose lineage runs straight back to Staff Sergeant Garrett Thatcher pressing his cheek against a modified Springfield, watching infrared silhouettes glow in the darkness, squeezing the trigger, making darkness no longer belong exclusively to the enemy. William Prescott died in 2008, age 87, knowing that the careful notes he'd taken in April 1945 had helped protect soldiers 60 years later. Today, serial number T120-47 sits in climate-controlled storage at the Smithsonian. When it's displayed, the label reads M2 Sniper Scope, Field Expedient Optical Assembly, 1945, one of the war's most unique artifacts, testament to American ingenuity under fire. But the real legacy isn't in museums. It's in doctrine, in training, in the knowledge that technology properly developed and courageously employed can overcome tactical disadvantages that persisted for millennia. 137 M2 systems, 89 deployed to combat, 37.6 pounds of equipment carried through Pacific jungles. Operators who trusted phosphorescent images when their eyes saw nothing. They changed warfare forever, not through superior numbers, not through better training alone, through innovation, through refusing to accept that inadequate equipment meant inevitable defeat, through the kind of American ingenuity that looks at impossible problems and says simply, "I'll figure it out." Garrett Thatcher, William Prescott, Patrick Brennan, Thomas Hartley, Edwin Caldwell, Douglas Whitmore, Raymond Donovan, Malcolm Fletcher, and 80 more men whose names appear in classified records, who operated M2 systems for 4 months in 1945, who killed over 2,000 enemy soldiers in conditions where conventional warfare said they should be blind. They proved that darkness doesn't belong to anyone exclusively. It belongs to whoever has the technology to see through it, and the courage to use that technology when lives depend on it. The M2 program lasted 4 months. Its legacy continues today. Every time a soldier looks through night vision goggles, every time Special Operations Forces conduct raids in total darkness, every time American forces own the night instead of surrendering it to the enemy, that's Garrett Thatcher's legacy. That's the M2's gift to modern warfare. The invisible made visible, the darkness made light, the impossible made real.